In the autumn of 1886, Silver Ridge was just another small frontier settlement trying to survive the long winters of Montana Territory. The people there believed in hard work, strong cabins, and traditions passed down from generations of pioneers. They believed that if you cut thick logs, stacked them high, sealed the cracks, and burned enough wood, you could survive anything winter brought. And for years, that belief was rarely questioned, even as families struggled through bitter cold, frozen walls, and endless nights feeding fires that never seemed to give enough warmth. That was why people laughed when Caleb Merritt said he was moving into a cave. Caleb was not a reckless man, nor was he lazy or afraid of winter. He was a railroad carpenter who had already lived through 7 Montana winters. He had seen men lose fingers and toes to frostbite, children fall sick from the cold, and families burn through their entire wood supply before winter was even half over. He had watched strong cabins fail not because they were poorly built, but because they were built in a way that fought nature instead of working with it. While others were hauling logs and stacking firewood, Caleb was walking east of town to a limestone cave carved into a hillside. It was known as Whitest Stone Cave, a place hunters used and children dared each other to explore. No one had ever considered living there. To the people of Silver Ridge, a cave was something dark, damp, and dangerous. It was not a home, but Caleb saw something different. He saw thick stone walls surrounded by earth. He saw an entrance facing south, protected from the worst winds. He remembered how warm railroad tunnels stayed in winter, even when the air above froze solid. He understood, even if he didn't use the words for it, that the earth held heat and released it slowly. He understood that stone could store warmth in a way wood never could. When Caleb began hauling lumber toward the cave, people assumed he was building a shed. When they realized he was sealing the entrance and constructing a living space inside, the rumors spread quickly. Some called him foolish. Others said he was desperate. The town's most respected builder warned that moisture would rot everything he owned and that he would suffocate or freeze. The criticism became personal. Living underground was seen as shameful, a sign of failure. By November, Caleb stopped eating meals in town. He avoided crowds and kept working quietly. Inside the cave, he built carefully. He sealed the entrance with 2 walls instead of 1 and packed the space between them with dry grass and wood shavings. He built the doorway so cold air could not rush straight inside. He placed his stove against the limestone wall and raised the floor with stone to trap cold air below him. He added ventilation that allowed smoke to escape without letting heat pour out. By the time winter arrived, his shelter was finished. To the town, it still looked like a mistake. Then, in January of 1887, the storm came. At first, it seemed like any other winter storm. Snow fell steadily, and the temperature dropped. People stayed indoors and kept their fires burning. But the storm did not stop. The snow piled higher, the wind grew stronger, and the cold deepened. Day after day, the blizzard locked Silver Ridge in ice and darkness. The wind howled without rest, forcing itself through every crack in every cabin inside the log homes. Fires burned constantly, yet ice formed on the walls. Families slept close together, breathing clouds of frost into the air. Firewood disappeared faster than anyone expected. Men shoveled paths just to reach their wood piles, only to find them shrinking by the hour. Some began burning furniture. Others tore apart sheds and fences. Fear crept into every home, not just of discomfort, but of survival. By the 6th day, families were abandoning their cabins. Children showed signs of hypothermia without ever stepping outside. Elderly residents developed frostbite indoors. The town hall became a shelter for dozens of people, yet even there, the cold never fully retreated. Fires roared, but the heat vanished into the frozen night. No one had seen Caleb Merritt since the storm began. Most assumed the cave had become his grave. When the blizzard finally broke after 9 relentless days, the town emerged slowly, exhausted and shaken. Snowdrifts buried doors and windows. Cabins stood silent and damaged. The losses were counted not just in supplies, but in suffering. It was then that a deputy marshal went to Whitest Stone Cave, expecting to recover a body. What he found instead left him speechless. Caleb opened the door wearing only a shirt, holding a warm cup of coffee. Inside the cave, the air was calm and warm. The stove burned gently, not fiercely. The stone walls radiated steady heat. A thermometer showed the temperature hovering in the low 50s, while outside it remained far below zero. Caleb had slept well, cooked meals, read books, and waited out the storm in quiet comfort. He had burned a fraction of the wood others had used. Word spread quickly. People came to see it for themselves. They stepped inside the cave and felt the warmth sink into their bones. The town's master builder measured the temperature himself, inspected the stone, and counted the firewood. He could not deny the numbers. The cave had worked better than any cabin in Silver Ridge. What had looked like madness was actually understanding. The stone walls had stored heat. The earth had shielded the shelter from wind and cold. The entrance design prevented drafts. The cave did not fight winter, it ignored it. While others battled the cold with endless fire, Caleb let physics do the work. By the end of winter, attitudes had changed. The man once mocked was now respected. Others began copying his ideas, digging into hillsides or using stone and earth to insulate their homes. The lesson spread quietly, not through books or speeches, but through survival. Caleb never claimed to be smarter than anyone else. He simply paid attention. He watched what failed and asked why. He trusted observation over tradition and results over pride. His cave cabin did not just keep him warm during a 9-day blizzard. It changed how people thought about shelter on the frontier. The cold did not care what people believed. It only responded to what worked, and in the frozen heart of Montana, one cave proved that sometimes the safest place is not built above the ground, but into it. In the days after the blizzard, Silver Ridge did not return to normal. The storm had passed, but it left behind something deeper than snowdrifts and damaged cabins. It left doubt. For the first time since the town was founded, people were questioning whether the way they had always done things was truly the best way. The cold had exposed weaknesses not just in buildings, but in beliefs. Men who had once laughed at Caleb Merritt now stood quietly inside his cave, running their hands along the limestone walls. They listened as he explained what he had done, not with pride, but with calm certainty. He spoke plainly, without technical words, explaining how stone held warmth, how the earth blocked wind, how controlling air mattered more than burning more wood. These were not theories to them anymore. They had lived the proof. Harold Sutherland, the town's master builder, returned to the cave more than once. The first time, he had come to measure and verify. The second time, he came to understand. He sat on a wooden bench inside the cave while the fire burned low, feeling the warmth remain steady. He asked questions, not as a critic, but as a craftsman who realized he had more to learn. For years, Harold had believed the answer to cold was thicker logs and bigger fires. That belief had built Silver Ridge. But it had also nearly broken it. The blizzard showed him that effort alone was not enough. Design mattered. Placement mattered. Nature could either drain heat away or protect it, depending on how a structure was built. What unsettled Harold most was not that Caleb's cave worked, but that it worked so quietly. There was no roaring fire, no frantic tending through the night, No desperate struggle. The shelter simply stayed warm. That kind of efficiency challenged everything Harold had taught and practiced for decades. As word spread beyond Silver Ridge, travelers began stopping to see the cave. Teamsters, prospectors, trappers, and homesteaders listened to the story and carried it with them. Some were skeptical, but many had endured winters just as brutal. They understood what it meant to wake up cold despite a fire that never stopped burning. They understood the fear of running out of wood before spring. By the next winter, change had begun. Not everyone moved into caves, but people started adapting. Some built cabins into hillsides instead of on open ground. Others banked earth against their walls, stacking soil and stone for insulation. Double-door entrances appeared throughout the town, creating small buffer spaces to block wind. Stone floors replaced bare wood in some homes. Even those who kept traditional cabins began placing stoves against stone or brick walls to store heat. These changes were small at first, but together they transformed how Silver Ridge survived winter. Caleb Merritt did not become a rich man, but he became a respected one. People sought his advice, not because he claimed authority, but because he listened carefully and spoke from experience. He never said his way was the only way. He said it was one way that worked. He reminded people that the land they lived on had rules, and winter enforced them without mercy. What made Caleb's approach powerful was not just the cave itself, but the mindset behind it. He did not ask how shelters had always been built. He asked how heat moved, where cold entered, and why effort failed to match results. He observed how the earth behaved and shaped his shelter to follow those patterns. This way of thinking slowly spread. In nearby settlements, similar stories emerged. A homesteading family dug part of their home into a slope and reduced their wood use by half. A prospector lined his cabin walls with stone and built a sun-facing entryway that stayed warm even in bitter wind. None of these people called their homes caves, but the influence was there. The frontier had always been about adaptation, but pride often delayed it. People wanted their homes to look strong, tall, and visible. Digging into the earth felt like surrender. Yet the blizzard taught a harsh lesson. Winter did not care how a home looked. It cared how it worked. Children who survived that winter grew up remembering it. They remembered frost forming inside homes. They remembered crowded shelters and burning furniture. But they also remembered the cave that stayed warm. Years later, when they built homes of their own, those memories guided their choices more than tradition did. Silver Ridge eventually grew into a larger town. Frame houses replaced many log cabins. Coal stoves arrived. Roads improved. The cave was no longer needed as a home, but it was not forgotten. Locals still pointed it out to newcomers, telling the story of the winter when one man stayed warm while everyone else struggled. Caleb himself never claimed hero status. He believed survival was not about bravery, but understanding. He often said that nature was not cruel, only consistent. It followed laws whether people respected them or not. The cold came every winter. The question was whether people prepared wisely. The cave stood for decades, slowly becoming part of the landscape. Its entrance weathered, the wood darkened, but the stone remained. It had done its job. It had proven that shelter was not about fighting the environment, but shaping life around it. The lesson reached beyond Montana. In places where winters were harsh and resources limited, people rediscovered old ideas or learned new ones that echoed Caleb's approach. Earth sheltering, thermal mass, controlled ventilation, these concepts appeared again and again, sometimes without knowing their source. What began as one man's quiet decision became part of a larger understanding. Survival favored those who observed, adapted, and set aside pride when it got in the way of reason. Looking back, it is easy to see why people doubted Caleb at first. His shelter did not look like success. It did not rise above the land. It disappeared into it. But that was its strength. It borrowed the earth's stability instead of standing alone against the wind. The 9-day blizzard did not just freeze a town. It exposed a truth that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. Heat is precious. Energy is limited. And the smartest solutions are often the quietest ones. In the end, the cave was never really the story. The story was a man who chose to understand the problem instead of repeating the solution that kept failing. He listened to what winter had been saying all along, and winter, relentless and unforgiving, finally answered back by letting him live in warmth while others learned the cost of ignoring physics. That is how a cave cabin kept one man warm during a 9-day blizzard, and how a town learned that survival does not belong to the loudest ideas, but to the ones that work when everything else fails. As the years passed, the winter of the 9-day blizzard became a reference point in Silver Ridge. People spoke of time as either before it or after it. Before the blizzard, winter was something to endure with stubbornness and routine. After it, winter became something to plan for with thought and respect. The change was subtle but lasting, woven into daily decisions rather than announced with pride. Caleb Merritt remained a quiet figure in town. He did not build monuments or write manuals. He worked when asked, helped when needed, and spent much of his time observing. He paid attention to how snow piled against hillsides, how wind curved around rock faces, how sun warmed stone long after it had set. He believed that nature was always teaching, but most people were too busy forcing their own ideas onto the land to listen. Younger men began seeking him out, especially those preparing to homestead in remote areas. They asked him about cabins, stoves, and insulation, but more often they asked him how to think. Caleb always answered the same way. He told them not to start with tools or materials, but with questions. Where does the wind come from? Where does the sun rise in winter? Where does cold settle at night? Where does heat escape first? He said that if a man could answer those questions honestly, the shelter would almost design itself. Some listened. Some didn't. Winter sorted them out. Over time, Silver Ridge changed. New buildings incorporated stone foundations instead of shallow footings. Entryways were built with turns instead of straight lines. Cellars grew deeper and warmer. Even when people didn't consciously think of Caleb's cave, its influence shaped the town's instincts. They had learned, through suffering, that survival depended on respecting forces larger than pride or habit. The cave itself became something of a quiet landmark. Travelers asked about it. Children were warned not to play inside without permission. Old-timers told the story with slight variations, but the core never changed. One man lived underground. Everyone laughed. Winter came. Everyone stopped laughing. Caleb aged, as all men do. His hair grayed, his hands stiffened, but his mind remained sharp. He eventually moved out of the cave when the town expanded and better materials became available. He never spoke badly of modern homes. He believed progress was good when it solved real problems. But he always warned against forgetting old lessons simply because new tools existed. He often said that comfort made people careless. When coal stoves replaced wood, people forgot how quickly fuel could disappear. When better roads arrived, people forgot how easily storms could isolate them. When winters were mild, people forgot that harsh ones always returned. The land never forgot. Decades later, when another brutal winter struck the region, the communities that fared best were the ones that had quietly kept those old ideas alive. Homes with earth protection stayed warmer longer. Buildings with thoughtful airflow wasted less heat. Families who understood insulation and thermal mass burned less fuel and slept better. None of them thought they were doing something revolutionary. They were simply doing what worked. Caleb Merritt passed away quietly, without ceremony. There was no statue, no plaque on the cave. But his influence remained in wood, stone, and soil across the region. His true legacy was not the shelter he built, but the mindset he left behind. He had shown that intelligence did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it dug into the earth and waited. In later years, engineers and architects would give names to the ideas Caleb had used instinctively. They would talk about thermal mass, passive solar design, and earth-sheltered construction. They would write books and draw diagrams. But Caleb never needed those words. He had learned by watching how heat moved, how cold behaved, and how the earth offered protection to those willing to accept it. The story of the cave cabin endured because it touched something universal. It reminded people that survival is not about proving strength to nature, but about understanding it. The frontier rewarded those who adapted, not those who insisted on doing things the hard way just because it looked brave. Even today, long after Silver Ridge changed and the old cave faded into history, the lesson remains relevant. Storms still come. Power still fails. Cold still kills without warning. And when modern systems break down, people are forced to remember older truths. Shelter matters. Heat matters. Design matters. The cave cabin was not magic. It was not luck. It was the result of paying attention and making choices that reduce struggle instead of increasing it. It showed that sometimes the safest place is not the tallest or strongest looking structure, but the one that quietly works in harmony with its surroundings. Caleb Merritt never set out to change how people built homes. He only wanted to survive winter without fear. In doing so, he showed others that survival does not require constant battle. Sometimes it requires humility, patience, and the courage to look foolish before being proven right. The 9-day blizzard is long gone. The snow melted. The town rebuilt. But the memory of warmth inside a cold world stayed with those who heard the story. It became a reminder passed from one generation to the next, not as legend, but as instruction. When winter comes, the earth is not your enemy. The wind is not something to challenge. Cold does not respond to stubbornness. It responds to understanding. That is the quiet truth behind how a cave cabin kept one man warm during a 9-day blizzard, and how that warmth spread far beyond stone walls, into the way people learn to live with the land rather than against it. And as long as winter returns, that lesson will never lose its meaning. Long after Caleb Merritt was gone, the land around Silver Ridge continued to change, but winter never did. Snow still followed the same winds through the valley, and cold still settled low at night, creeping into walls when fires weakened. The seasons ignored progress and history, repeating themselves year after year. What changed was how people responded. The children who once huddled in the town hall during the great blizzard grew into adults who built differently. They remembered the fear in their bones, the sound of wind pushing through walls, and the sight of frost forming indoors. Most of all, they remembered the cave that stayed warm when nothing else did. No laws were written and no speeches were made, but memory guided choices. When those children claimed land, they chose hillsides over open flats, dug deeper cellars, and used stone whenever possible. Often they didn't know why these choices felt right. They simply did. As time passed, coal replaced wood, brick replaced logs, and electricity followed. Comfort returned, and with it came forgetfulness. But nature reminded people again and again. Storms cut power. Fuel deliveries failed. Sudden cold snaps tested homes. And once more, Buildings protected by earth and stone held warmth longer, while others lost it fast. The cave cabin became a lesson rather than a legend. Teachers shared it. Elders repeated it. It reminded people that progress never erased physics. Heat still escaped the same way. Cold still searched for weakness. Beyond Silver Ridge, similar truths appeared everywhere. In deserts, heat tested shelter. In floodplains, water did. Survival favored those who studied their environment instead of fighting it. The cave became a symbol of humility and understanding. Caleb Merritt's name faded, but his thinking did not. Engineers later named the principles he had used instinctively. Architects spoke of efficiency and passive design. Scientists explained in numbers what Caleb learned by watching. The cave itself slowly returned to the earth. Grass grew over stone. Yet even in ruin, it remained a reminder that shelter is about balance, not dominance. Caleb did not conquer winter. He stepped aside and let it pass. That idea lives on in modern thinking about resilience and sustainability. In crises, people still turn basements into refuges, earth into insulation, and stone into warmth. Under pressure, humanity remembers what works. The cave cabin was never about rejecting progress. It was about respecting limits. It showed that survival improves when people understand the systems they depend on. Every generation faces its own storms. Survival belongs to those who adapt, learn, and set pride aside when it becomes dangerous. The 9-day blizzard became a quiet teacher. It taught that warmth is not only made by fire, but by wisdom. And beneath the ground, where the earth still holds steady against the cold, that lesson waits for anyone willing to listen.